Right, welcome to another episode of the Old Paratrooper Podcast, a podcast where we have a variety of guests from all walks of life sharing their interesting stories, with the main goal of raising awareness for mental health, for military veterans, emergency services communities, and across the board in general. If you haven't subscribed already, please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. I really appreciate it. But without further ado, today's guest, someone that doesn't do a lot of podcasts, so it's a privilege to have him on, and that's former Scots Guards and SAS officer, former mercenary and author, Captain Simon Mann. How you doing, pal? All right?
Yeah, good morning. I'm good, thanks.
Good. We got past the technical difficulties.
Power of Scots Guards. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Yes, it's been a learning curve with the technology, but I've got there. But no, thank you very much for taking the time to come on. Like I said, I know you don't do a lot of podcasts, so it's a real privilege to have you on, and I really appreciate you giving your time.
Yeah, well, I am a mercenary, so I no one was paying me, so I had to stop doing them.
Kind of defeats the object, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, what kind of mercenaries are we?
Brilliant. Well, what I'd like to do, Simon, with all the kind of podcasts is go back to the start, a bit about your background, where you grew up, what you were like as a child, and then kind of the path that you took along the way into joining the military and beyond. So, yeah, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, a very privileged background. I was sort of brought up, born in London. I brought up in the country near Newbury, sent to Eton. My father was a very famous cricketer and an heir to the Watney Man, brewing thing. So very privileged. And at the same time, lots and lots of soldiers. I mean, my father had an MC in a bar and a DSO. So did his brother. And my grandfather had fought the whole way through the First World War. They'd all fought the whole way through the Second. So it was very much, although they were not professional soldiers as such, they had merely fought the Germans. So there was very much a sense of soldiering as being, I mean, it's a different age now, but I think everyone's sort of forgotten. You grew up in the 50s and the 60s, that there was a sense that the Second World War had only just ended and the Third World War was just about to begin. And so I was always fascinated by the military. Actually, I wanted to be I am a pilot now, but I always wanted to be a Spitfire pilot in the Air Force. And then I discovered they hadn't got Spitfires any longer. So that went by the board. I didn't want to join Watneys. And I had a cousin, Lockie McLean, who some of the people watching us may even know him, because he was a Scots Guards and Guards Independent Parachute Company, and then one of the very first officers of G Squadron, because some of you will know, G Squadron 22 SAS was actually formed because of, or out of, if you like, the Brunei confrontation against Indonesia, when they basically ran out of SAS squadrons and decided to form another one, which would be obviously the best. Would be G Squadron. And actually Lockie was one of the first. But anyway, so when I was at school, I knew, I was at Eton, brat, and my nanny was sending me all this information about what Lockie was up to in the jungle. So obviously it was a different time then, but I remember there was a Sunday Times colour supplement that went into great detail with photographs of the SAS in Brunei. And I thought, wow, that is hardcore. That's the first 11. And that's why I want to get to that. So I joined the Scots Guards. I went to Sandhurst, did a regular commission, the old Sandhurst, the old 2-year course. I was one of the last people going through on the old 2-year course, because in those days there was Sandhurst and Mons. Mons was for short service. Sandhurst was for regular. I wanted to be a regular because I wanted to go to the SAS. That was my ambition, which ultimately I did. Did selection. I was on 1/78 was my selection. Troop commander tour, 3 years. Enjoyed it. Asked to stay on by Mike Rose to do another job, but the Scots Guards wouldn't let me. Again, in those days, it was a little bit different, and the Brigade of Guards could sort of basically tell anyone where to get off, and I wasn't allowed to do the job I was offered. So I resigned and became a civilian.
Any sort of regrets? Because obviously, for the viewers and the kind of people that are watching, obviously, when you're an officer, you kind of do a bit of a stint, don't you? And then you go back and kind of move on back to either your. Right. You don't go like a regular soldier. You go.
Yeah, you've only got I think 20 officers. In my day, it was only 20 officers and 22 SAS. Obviously, there were lots more in headquarters and all of that. But because of that, they had to keep it rotating, because otherwise it would be like dead men's shoes. There'd be nobody new coming in because there'd be the 20 there. So they worked that rotation system, which is very different from what applies to the men, because obviously the men can stay there as long as they like if they've got there. So yeah, very different.
How did you find selection? Because I always ask this question, because I have some people that come on and say, yeah, I loved it. I had John Graham on a week or so ago, who's running concepts, and he was like, oh, I really enjoyed it. And I always think, okay. And as an officer as well, you have to be shown. It's a bit like the parachute regiment when they do P Company, and I suppose with the Royal Marine, you've got to lead from the front. Does that apply to selection?
Yeah, I mean, there's very little leading on selection.
Just getting through.
Well, no, it's just, you're on your own, basically, on the test week. And then obviously when you get into the jungle, it's slightly different. But no, I'm one of those, I enjoyed it.
One of those strange folk that enjoy the pain of it.
I loved it. In fact, myself and Rupert Pritchard, who until recently was the chairman of the SAS Association, who's a friend of mine. And apparently we were the first two officers for like 20 years who got an A on test week.
Really?
So we really were nutcases.
Well, I did speak to someone again. I won't mention his name that I had on the podcast. And I mentioned your name, and he goes, "Oh, you'll have a great time with him on. He's a bit of an eccentric. He's kind of really chatty. He's done a lot of stuff. So I've been really excited to get you on and talk to you about this kind of stuff." Was the kind of resignation a bit in sort of kind of as a two fingers up to them then to say, right, if you're not letting me stay on here, I'm going.
No, it was two fingers. It was two fingers to the Scots Guards,
right?
Because this is bloody ridiculous. In a man management sense, it's just terrible. I've been offered a super job. I wanted to do it. Mike Rose wanted me to do it. I had a quarter at Hereford, and they said, oh, no, you're going to be a major in the Scots Guards. You'll actually be the youngest major in the British Army right now. And you ought to be very privileged to take it because, it was the company your father commanded in the war, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I don't want to do it. I do not want to be having my company putting the stands up for the birthday parade or whatever stupid thing it is, because, and I really enjoyed Hereford. I really enjoyed the SAS. So that's what I wanted to do. So when they said, well, no, you can't do it, I said, okay, well, I'm off.
Yeah, I can understand that. Like SAS, not just in the British Army, but in the world, it's kind of like the holy grail of soldiering, isn't it? It's like you don't get much more of a pinnacle. So what do you do after that? I can imagine being like almost like some of the guys that get RTU'd for various things. They then decide, well, I'm going to get out because it's not. I've achieved the maximum I can as a soldier. Why would I go backwards? It's not the right route, is it? So I understand where you're coming from.
No, I think that is the case. And the other thing, bear in mind, when I joined the SAS, it was before the embassy.
Yeah.
And as my son said to one of my younger sons recently, he said, remember when Dad joined, nobody even knew about it. They really were a bunch of bleep diddy bleep lunatics.
Absolutely.
There was no T-shirt. I mean, it was like, what do you mean? Where are they? Hereford, where's that?
Yeah, like the embassy siege was almost like the calling card to the world. It's been said before that announced the SAS onto the world scene, didn't it, and into the news.
Yeah, no, everything changed actually.
Yeah.
I mean, and not necessarily for the good either. Anyway, that's a whole other ballgame.
That's a whole different story.
The whole story there.
But obviously, so you kind of left, you became a civilian. Now, it's kind of, I think it's fairly well known that you went into the mercenary sort of arena. And you
that was actually later because
so
when I left, no, I can't quite get the dates right, but I mean, basically, I'd left just before the Falklands War, which was extremely frustrating because obviously Scots Guards went and obviously said yes, and so I had a lot of people, and in fact, some of my troop were in that helicopter that went down, and so then I was a civilian, and I found myself sort of drifting, and actually went to work with Colonel David Sterling,
wow.
which was really wild because he was a sort of a friend of mine. well, I adopted him as an honorary godfather. I gave him no choice, but we were friends, and obviously he was much older than me, but I did work for him. And then various things happened in Civvy Street, and then the Gulf War came along, and I rejoined. So I was a staff officer for Peter de la Villiers, who, if you remember, was the Gulf War general.
Yeah, I've read his book. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually helped with some of the book. He used to give me the chapter, and it helped, just what you think of this sort of thing. It was a great time actually working for him, because he's a great guy. When that all came to an end, which was in about May 92, I then joined my friend Tony Buckingham. In fact, the SAS offered me another job at that time, which I was very, very tempted to take. But by then I was 40, and I was thinking, really about time I grew up.
Never.
So yeah, well, so I had to make some money, basically. My friend Tony Buckingham had his oil and gas company called Heritage, and he said, look, Heritage is getting off the ground. And I had actually helped him get him into somewhere with Heritage, to Angola, in fact. And he said, join me, you need to make some money, blah, blah, blah. He was very jealous about the job. He said, but no, but you really got to make some money. So I thought, okay, I'm going to leave again, and I'll become a oil and gas man. And 6 months later, I was a general in the Angolan army.
Wow. That's some progression there, isn't it?
That's what happened, because we had my efforts at becoming a civvy were awful, obviously, because the next thing I was in this full-on war in Angola. And that was how Executive Outcomes, the mercenary company, started. We started it then. That was amazing. And at one point, Executive Outcomes was 2,000 men operational in 2 wars, Angola and Sierra Leone. That was in like 93, 4, 5, 6, that time.
So is the I've always wondered, like the film Blood Diamond. So I did Sierra Leone with the Parachute Regiment in 2000 when it kicked off up there. The film Blood Diamond, the mercenary company out there, is that based on Executive Outcomes or Sandline, or is that? I always was under the impression that company was one of the ones that you were part of.
Yeah, so the movie Blood Diamond, which I think is a very good movie, was basically about the Executive Outcomes deployment. That's what it's built around. But obviously, Hollywood being Hollywood, they completely rewrite it. And so it's slightly upsetting, because actually we were the good guys. And in the movie, we are the bad guys. But that was based upon our intervention, yes, which obviously precedes the whole British Army deployment by quite a long way. And in fact, we were thrown out because the US government didn't really like Executive Outcomes at all, and nor did the UK one once Sierra Leone got going, because they just didn't like. They didn't like us. They just didn't like the idea that. Remember, this is all back in the day when the Berlin Wall's just come down, and everyone's wondering how the new world is going to work without the Cold War, etc., etc. So it was all a bit different. And when people woke up and realized what we were doing in Angola and Sierra Leone, and there was the success and also the power that we had, because we had our own fast jets, we had our own helicopters, we had everything, people just got really nervous and said, hang on, wait a minute, this isn't the way we want the world to work.
Well, they probably got a bit scared, about the whole private army thing. And what people don't kind of realize, this was prior, obviously, to 2003 when the second Gulf War kicked off. The whole mercenary world was then massive, and the private security companies sort of launched and into the forefront, didn't they?
Very much so. And in fact, I remember sort of talking to people in those days, like 95, 96, and the Executive Outcomes people were saying, well, boss, where are we going next? Where's the next war? Because we won these 2. I'm saying, no. Forget it. It's not. This is not repeatable. People were saying, well, we could become the United Nations intervention force in Africa. I said, no. That's not going to happen. This is a one-off. And then, sure enough, I was proven to be dead wrong, because, as you say, Gulf War II came along, and the Gulf War 1. No, wait, 2. And then the whole PMC thing took off big time. But I would always differentiate between a PSC, a PMC, and a bunch of mercenaries. I don't know quite what you call the latter one, but there is a big difference, because if you take, let's say, a Blackwater or an Aegis operating in Iraq, for example, they will shoot back if they're shot at. That's a given. And they will escort people, and they might get pretty aggressive, or they might patrol. But there is a subtle difference between that and saying, we're here to win a war.
Yeah, they're not a fighting force as per se, are they?
They'll fight, but they're not doing what Executive Outcomes did for Angola, which was to say, basically, you're losing this war, and we will show you and help you to win it. That's a very different moral and different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously with the Iraq thing, you were kind of an extension of the US Army. I work for Aegis, obviously a good friend of yours that kind of set up that company.
Yeah, the dreaded Colonel Spicer.
Yes, I've met him a few times. I'm trying to get him on the podcast. Apparently he is up for it in the future, but trying to nail him down and track him down is a bit... he's a bit elusive.
Actually, I saw him last week, believe it or not.
How was he? You all right?
Very good, yeah, very good. And a very good friend of mine. He's actually my second son's godfather.
Well, if you see him again, or you're in touch with him, I tell him I worked on Op Tourist for ages, and he'll know exactly, because there was a few lunatics like myself that decided to go on that op because it was really, really dodgy. So he will know. So yeah, try and persuade him for me. But no, so obviously it's kind of a weird one. Like I say, the mercenary world, or the kind of private security company, I'm glad you've differentiated it, because I always sort of class myself a little bit as a mercenary because I was doing the stuff, but I suppose I wasn't, like you say, a fighting force. I was there to protect people.
But the thing I find about this, Pinchy, is that it's a completely pointless conversation, because in the sense of, I don't mean this conversation we're having, what I mean is this endless debate about mercenary, what. Is a Gurkha a mercenary? Are we mercenaries because we're paid to be soldiers in the British Army? Mercenary is a word which is a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like calling a woman a whore. Does that mean she's a prostitute or she sleeps around? Do you know what I mean? It's like, we could talk about that all day and still we won't get anywhere. We're mercenaries. We do stuff for money. So does everybody else. And I think really the differentiation is, I actually prefer condottieri, because that's the Italian for mercenary.
All right, I like that. I'm not able to pronounce it, but I do like that.
Condottieri. It sounds so much more chic.
It does, doesn't it? No, I agree. I'll use that in the future.
What do you do? I'm a condottieri.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, so obviously kind of, Sandline and Executives, very, very kind of big businesses. They did really, really well for the time they were kind of operating. It's well publicized that there was a lot of fun, made a lot of money. They did good things. So that came to an end. Now, I want to talk about, obviously, it's kind of, what I'm going to ask about. And the reason being, because I know, and I will not mention any names. Sadly, one of them's passed away now, but they were part of the coup in kind of Equatorial New Guinea. So they kind of, and I'll talk to you off air, and you'll probably know the names of the two gentlemen that I'm going to say. But how did that come about? I mean, and obviously there is I'm going to say allegedly because I don't know the legal stuff, but there was obviously an involvement from Mark Thatcher as well, wasn't there? Allegedly.
Yeah. I mean, that all came about. That was 2003. I was recruited by a guy called Eli Khalil, who's dead now. That was to overthrow the government of Equatorial Guinea, which went horribly wrong. I got arrested in Harare, 4 years in prison in Harare, and then I was kidnapped from there and smuggled to Equatorial Guinea, where I did another 18 months in prison there.
Was that the Black Beach prison?
Yeah, Black Beach.
Yeah, that I've read a little bit about that, and how did it go wrong? Do you think you were kind of stabbed in the back potentially, or?
Yeah, we were really pushing it. We knew we'd been compromised, but we felt we had enough backing from enough agencies and what have you that we could just sort of keep going, basically, and we'd get there. And in a way, Angola and Sierra Leone, we'd been so successful by just being ballsy and quick and getting on with it. I think I just thought, we've got bags of backing. We'll just keep going. We'll make it. We didn't. Big mistake.
But what was the end goal? What was the kind of the reasoning behind it? What was the interest in trying to overthrow the government? Because I don't know enough about it to kind of...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a long story. But I mean, basically, the government of Equatorial Guinea is pretty tyrannical. It's not at all democratic. The people don't see any of the money that they've got. They've got huge amounts of oil wealth. And the plan was to try and create a sort of West African Dubai in Equatorial Guinea, which is an incredibly beautiful place. Terrible climate. I mean, it's very, very hot, but I mean, it can be done. And the idea was to make the country democratic and wealthy. That was the plan.
And it kind of went a bit south, to say the least.
Well, we were torpedoed. I mean, we were well and truly torpedoed. But I can tell you that President Mbeki, the president of South Africa, was entirely knowledgeable and in favour of what we were doing up until 2 hours before I was arrested. So I'm not going to tell you too much. I mean, it's a whole story. But this was not kind of a totally sort of fly-by-night, unauthorised thing. You know, a lot of people were giving it a nod and a wink. And when it went wrong, of course, at that point, everyone dives for cover. Nothing to do with us. We don't know what they were doing. Man's a lunatic, etc.
Deny all kind of involvement from the off. And that's the bit like some of the operations the SAS go on, isn't it? You know, they're kind of... And also...
Yeah, well, I was explaining to somebody the other day, you know, overt, covert, clandestine. What does clandestine mean? We're not going to admit it. That's what it means.
Yeah. And it's like...
Always deniable.
Yeah, and that must be frustrating because, like, knowing that what you know and having the backing from these people and then them to turn around and deny everything must be massive on that scale. And then to have to... You were sentenced to 34 years in prison, I believe. Is that right?
I was sentenced to 34 years. Yeah, that was in Equatorial Guinea. That was when they tried me again, and that's quite a story in itself. They actually said, "Well, look, you know, you've been very helpful to us in your interrogation," which I had been because I wanted to get out. I wanted to get home. You know, I mean, I thought I was going to die. I said, "Well, how am I going to be helpful to you in the trial?" And they said, "Well, we want you to plead guilty." So I said, "Okay, well, what do you want me to plead guilty to?" They said, "Well, attempted murder, attempted assassination of a head of state, and acts of international terrorism." I said, "You got me to plead guilty to that?" Yep. Jesus.
Yeah, that's not something... I bet the alarm bells started ringing there a bit, thinking, well, yeah.
Little bit.
Obviously,
I plead guilty to this. You can take me straight outside and shoot me.
They had the death penalty, didn't they? Because I think that was part of the worry, wasn't it? That maybe we're going to get the death penalty. And I mean, admitting to that, you probably would have been looking at it, right?
I thought I was... Well, I did plead guilty, but I thought they would just shoot me when I got there, actually, to Equatorial Guinea. I thought they were just going to shoot me on arrival. But it was all okay, and I got a pardon. And now I'm a friend of the president. Can you believe that? He's still the president, and I go and see him.
Wow.
Pretty weird.
It's an unlikely friendship.
It's like Stockholm syndrome in reverse.
Yeah. What was the kind of, if you don't mind just briefly kind of saying, what were the prison conditions like in New Guinea? I can imagine, because I've had Nick Dunn on. I don't know if you know Nick Dunn. He was kind of held prisoner in an Indian prison after being captured, supposedly.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and he kind of describes in detail being kept in an Indian prison, and I just wanted your take on what the conditions were like and what was going through him. Obviously, the podcast is designed to raise awareness for mental health, so I want to know how your mindset and how your mental health was when you were sat in this prison with the prospect of 34 years. How do you? Because your mind must be kind of to come through the other side of that. I just want to know how it affected you, and does it continue to affect you now?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of this is sort of luck, really. Some people, I mean, this whole sort of PTSD thing. I mean, and I know people who, by any normal reckoning, ought to be massively suffering with PTSD, but they're fine. And then there are other people who you think, well, big deal, wasn't so bad, was it? And they do have PTSD. And I think it's a bit like, you can have a genetic disposition to a certain illness. I think some of us are born, luckily or not luckily, whatever, with more resistance to a condition than other people, and that's just sort of bad luck. And then I think also there is a cultural aspect to it. So it can be genetic or it can be cultural. So you can grow up in an environment where perhaps the culture around you is such that it does make you more resistant. And then there is the whole business of your education and training. And of course, I think training makes a huge difference. It's a complicated subject, isn't it? And I was very frightened that I would go mad. I think to me, going mad would be just a horrible thing if you sort of knew you were sliding into insanity. And after all, we're all going to die. We all know that, but we don't all have to go mad. So I was very scared of it. And I took in the end, I got it down to a very, very sort of rigid approach. And being a guardsman, routine, physical exercise, doing something artistic, believe it or not, and then keeping a log, keeping a diary, a written diary. So routine, exercise, something arty, and keeping a log where I basically scored myself as to how well was I doing with my routine, with my fitness, and my art. And that was my four things that I used. And I don't know whether that because of them or why, but I was fine, basically. I was okay or during, and I have been since, although there are a few people who comment on that.
Well, it's funny you should say that. You say you were worried about going mad. I'm sure there's some people out there to say what in the past you'd be a little bit mad to start with. So, there is that aspect. But no, it's really kind of interesting that you said that. It's about that, having that routine, fitness, keeping a log, doing something artistic. And I think you can really take something away from what you've said there and apply that to everyday life. I think if people don't have a purpose and they haven't got a routine or they're
Absolutely.
not out walking, I harp on quite a lot about physical activity, whether it's going for a walk, going to the gym. I know if I don't do any of that sort of stuff for long periods, I notice a dip in my own mental health. So I think it's really interesting having that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think it's anything magic about it, because the 18 months I was in prison in Black Beach, I was in strict solitary confinement, which for 18 months is meant to be very bad for you, mentally and physically, actually. Well, obviously it is. And yeah, I worked my way through it. And I think, I talked to the SAS Association about this at dinner. I was the speaker, and I knew what Rupert Pritchard was the chairman. I knew what he wanted me to talk about. And I made the point, which was, I think is worth making, which is, we're all very scared of mental health because it's a very difficult subject. You can't see it. And I think we look at it in a binary way, which is wrong. So if I can give an example, if we talk about our physical health, I go skiing, I break my leg, I've got plaster, I'm on crutches, but I'm fine. I'm moving around, I'm seeing my friends, I'm absolutely fine. But clearly I'm not fine. I've got a broken leg. Now, surely when we think about mental health, we can look at it in a graduated way, because I think part of the problem is that one of the reasons we're so scared of it, talking about it and really addressing it, is that we look at it binary. We say, well, you're either okay or you're not okay. Do you see what I mean? In mental health, if I say I've got a mental health problem, people think, oh, fuck, he's gone bonkers. Whereas I might say, well, no, actually, I'm pretty much okay. I've just got the mental equivalent of a broken leg. I'm basically okay, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah,
I think that's a difficult concept when you're talking about mental health.
Yeah, because there's mental health, there's having good mental health, and then there's having this, and there's a big difference. And like there's still now people struggle to kind of literally separate the two. Now, mental illness is when you have a have maybe it's something genetic, something, an actual mental health that impedes you. Mental health is, it's okay to be a bit sad, but I think what happens is people get a bit sad, they don't know how to deal with it, and then they call it that they're having a mental illness problem, and it's just, you manage your fitness by going to a gym, like you've quite rightly said, and you do stuff to keep you. So you need to kind of manage your mental health, whether it's kind of.
Yeah, but I mean, even illness. I mean, I can have malaria and I can still be functioning. I still be able to talk to you on the phone. I am definitely ill. I'm very definitely ill, but I'm not a basket case. You know what I mean? And so why do we look at mental health and mental illness in such a binary way? That you're either okay or you're not okay. Why can't we look at it? I mean, a therapist, I think, would agree with me, because I mean, somebody who goes to therapy because they have low self-esteem and they're worried their girlfriend's going to leave them or something, and they go to see the therapist to talk about this. I mean, this is sensible. That's actually sensible, and it's not. It's not like, oh, I've got this big mental problem. No, it's like, I've hurt my hand. Now, I'll go and see the doctor. Doc, can you do something for my hand? No one's saying I'm about to die or anything. I'm not a basket case. So why can one not have a similar attitude to mental health and go along to somebody and say, look, I'm not feeling great. This is the problem. Now, of course, the reason we don't do this is because the brain is the most complicated thing in the known universe, the human brain, and we don't really know how it works. And so we're scared, and we tend to look at it in a much too sort of black and white way. Either we're okay or we're not okay. And I think that, because actually what happened to me, which may help people, is that when I got out of prison, I mean, obviously there was it was quite shocking, really. And I went and saw a doctor. He sent me another doctor who actually had been a prisoner himself. The doctor I went to see, the second one, and he had been held hostage by rebels in Sudan for like 9 months. Okay, not quite the same thing, but still, he'd been through it. And he sat down with me and we had a chat for about an hour, and he said, look, Simon, the way I would deal with this if I was you is I would only seek therapy if you really feel you need it. And I took his advice, and to be honest with you, I should not have done. I should have talked to somebody then. And of course, I mean, I'm sure you know the poem that David Sterling linked to the SAS, we are the pilgrim's master, blah, blah, blah. We will always go further. And as my friend Rupert Pritchard said, that is the worst thing that anybody has managed to come up with in terms of our mental health. Because it basically, everyone's thinking, I've got to be tough. I'm okay. I'm tough. I've done whatever I've done in the army. I've never done this, that, and I don't need help. And that is our natural default position. I'm sure it's yours. It's certainly mine. And I think everyone else I know with the similar sort of backgrounds, we're all the same, because that's who we are. So for us to ask for help, especially if we think it's a minor problem, like I said before, we leave it. It's binary. Like, I'm either okay or I'm not okay. But actually, look at it that there are a whole spectrum between those two things of being 100% okay and 100, and 0% okay. There is a complete spectrum, and there is nothing wrong with talking to somebody who you trust or somebody professional, because you're sort of somewhere else on the spectrum. You don't have to be right down there on the spectrum. You can be feeling a bit down. Go and talk to somebody. And that is a difficult thing to get over, I think, to people. I mean, me included. I find it difficult. Of course I do. We all do. We, like I said, we've all got this background whereby we we think we can hack it.
Yeah, and that I do talk about this a lot. It's the first step is accepting, firstly, you've something wrong, and also willing to accept that you may need to talk to someone. And it's difficult for men, certainly men that have done similar sort of lines of work that we have, because you've got this stigma around you that you're kind of bulletproof, and it's accepting that perhaps, and it's getting out there, the word is getting out there, and people are now sort of doing it. But again, the reason I started this, because we probably both know lots of people over the years that have taken their own life when they feel like they've not been able to talk to someone, or they've got nowhere else to go. And I find that really, really sad. And that really got me, and was again why I started thinking, if I can just get people like yourself on that have kind of been through things in life, been in, and willing to sit there that you've given, hopefully,
obviously a lunatic. Yeah. No, I think, do you know who I mean by Tim Collins? He's a friend of mine. I mean, I know him. And we'd been to a dinner, and we were both speakers at the dinner. And the dinner was a big City of London, Guildhall, whatever, about PTSD. And it was a big charity do, and lots of money, and there'd been an auction and all that. Anyway, after the dinner, we're both outside in our dinner jackets trying to get taxis, take our wives, go home. We're standing there in the rain looking at the taxi. And Tim turned around to me and he said, it's Belfast or Northern Ireland. So, Simon, I'm not too sure about this fucking PTSD thing, are you? I turned to him and I said, no, actually, I'm a bit dubious about it as well. And I think, it's not like neither of us accept that this stuff is going on. It is going on. We know it is. I myself nearly passed out once with PTSD. I mean, I had to be carried onto the ground because otherwise I was going to fall over. Long time ago. And so I know it's real. But I think it goes back to this binary thing that there are degrees. There are many shades. It's complex. We're very complex. And as you said, the first thing is to be able to just say, something's a bit wrong. And then to be able to say that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Then you're on the road to sorting it out, probably.
No, absolutely. You're right. It's not as cut and dried as you're poorly or you're not. There are different, and everyone's brain's different, and everyone deals with it. And in particular, might take medication. For some people, it might take therapy. It might just take management of their lifestyle or a change in diet. All sorts of different things. But it's a very, very
it's more gym, less pub.
Yeah, probably less alcohol, and yeah, exactly that. So there are a million different ways, but no, it's a really good kind of sort of way of and I'll use that in the future because I like the way you've worded that. And I always say, every guest I have on, I love doing this because I take little bits away from some more than others. I take bits and bobs away, and it kind of improves the person I am with the knowledge that I gain. So for that, that's the and I get to talk to interesting people like yourself. So look, I'm conscious of the time. I know you said 11:30 was a bit of a cut off. So very, very lastly, I just want to say you've got a book out. You've had a book out for a number of years.
Yeah. I'm still working, still involved in security and defence. My son's got his own security company called Alma Risk, which is doing very well. As you know, it's a very competitive. That's the same one that used to work for Tim Spicer. He's Tim's godson. And actually, he was the Aegis country manager in Libya for a while. But then the whole Libya thing sort of collapsed with no clients there. Anyway, his company, he runs that with Mark Osborne, his partner. A lot of the people will know Mark. And that's successful. And so I tend to get involved in security quite often to do with Africa and quite often to do with mining or oil and gas. So I help people. Maybe somebody wants some mining opportunities checked out, and the security, the political risk involved. I work on that.
Awesome stuff. Well, it sounds like you're keeping yourself. You look very well, I must say. You look very well and healthy. Fair play to you. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Again, a great insight. I know it will be a popular podcast.
Good. Yeah. No, I don't mind doing it again. I think it's so important, this. And I think it's like very hard to get over to some of the people you and I know that it's okay to talk. You know, it really is. And you've got to do it, because otherwise and I think, you know, you've got to also not be selfish, because if you don't get treated, you know, and it's going wrong, it's actually the people around you and the people who love you who are going to be hurt. You know, it's not just about you, about everyone else too.
Absolutely. And again, great advice. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.